I'm going to do this in Paint. Why not? So, right, Heidegger starts the essay by saying, well, let's do this. You have the artwork over here. And I don't know why I'm writing it when I could be drawing it. Let's do this. Let's see if I can do this correctly. So something like that. Then you have all these different colors. I guess it's probably supposed to be like the primary colors or something, so I'm screwing this up. But you know what I'm drawing. See this? Now this itself is an artwork, right? You have the artwork, and you say, what is the origin of the artwork? I recently read the abstract of, I'm going to read the actual paper, the abstract of an article that was suggesting this whole obsession with origins is a direct response to Hegel, which, if so, is new to me. So I need to check that out, and maybe we can dive into some Hegel stuff too. I mean, that's obviously doing the phenomenology of spirit cover to cover is one of the explicit goals of this Twitch stream, but obviously that's not going to happen soon. But maybe there's some specific things Hegel wrote about art that we can look at. But that's getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. Over here, right, the answer to the question, what is the origin of the artwork, is obviously the artist. In that case, me. So I guess I'd hair, beanie over the hair. You know the deal here. But in fact, right, Heidegger says, I drew the artwork, but what would make me an artist except the artwork, right? In a certain sense, I can't be an artist unless I have art that I paint, that exists, that's mine, right? Well, or whatever kind of art. So it works on that level. The other level in which the artwork precedes the artist is the sense that, I need to have some sense of the meaning of art for that to be possible. That I can even be an artist at all depends not just on my own artworks, but the general existence of artworks, right? This is kind of one of those, this is just this kind of endless circle of like a chicken and the egg type of question. Was the artwork first, or was the artist the thing, or the thing that made it? And of course, Heidegger says we have to actually walk this circle and work our way back to the common source of both of them, which is in this case, art. Now, the reason I'm going over this again is that this is a basically Aristotelian idea, that you have these larger categories that can be split down into smaller and smaller categories. So on the one hand, with Aristotle, the way you would learn what things are is starting from the most general and seeing it split down into its most particular. But of course, in terms of having Aristotle taught to you, but the way you would actually find out how to properly build those, that map of all the things splitting down into smaller things, to do that, you would actually have to, sorry. I had a moment where I was like, did I? Because I've done it before. Did I actually not unmute my mic? To figure out the more particular things, or to figure out what the most general things are, like art, you actually have to start. This is the Aristotelian position, because Aristotle, compared to, say, Plato, is more of an empiricist. You'd have to start with the most particular things and work your way up to the most general things. So it's like the way in which you can present what you've learned is in a top-down fashion, but the way in which you would discover that the information would be to work in a bottom-up way. Now, this helped me to realize, because, Heidegger says we're trying to figure out what is art, since we've decided that art is the source of both artists and artwork. But then he says, like I just said, you're going to have to go to the most particular and find into artworks for the art that actually prevails in them. And he also, like Aristotle, remember this is what Aristotle says about being, for example. Being is not just the sum of things. Being is the distinct I wanted to say entity, but I don't think that's right, actually. But so, what I think Aristotle ultimately defines it as is, I guess Aristotle would say unity, right? And it's the unity of analogy, but that's a little far afield, and it's if you're interested in that, we've already talked about that in the Being and Time series, which we will get back to, but it's preserved on YouTube. The artwork, but art, is not just the sum of all the artworks and artists. It's actually a distinct thing, which is the source of artwork and artist. But to find it, we're going to have to walk this circle and actually look at the things themselves to work our way back to art. And then the first thing he does is break up art and work again between allegory, the thing which speaks other, and thing, right? So he says thing first. He says, well, what are artworks? Well, first of all, they're what are Holderlin's hymns? They're the books that Holderlin carried that soldiers carried around in their backpacks in World War I or something, right? They're physical things. But then, of course, that's obviously everyone knows that's not exactly what artworks are. And so he says what makes them unique is that they have allegory, right? They are things that, in a sense, potentially stand in for something else, or I think the way he puts it is that in which the other speaks, or in which something other lands, which is to say, on the one hand, the painting is literally a canvas with paint on it, but usually, unless we're thinking very carefully about it, we don't talk about it in that way. We say it's the Mona Lisa, right? It's a person. But of course we know it's actually a canvas with paint on it, but there's also a sense in which it's a place in which something other lands. But this stuff, the allegory, we'll get back to that later. Right now, Heidegger's concerned with thing. And the reason is, that was something I couldn't quite understand why he was doing. And I now, after doing this reading about Aristotle, I do understand it. Hey, Sea Dog, how's it going? What up? We're just working on back to some Heidegger. The thing is, Aristotle has this idea, and I'm not an expert in Aristotle, okay, so don't take everything I say with a grain of salt. There are these different levels of potentiality and actuality, right? Which is to say, right, you can build up, or think of it this way, right? If I'm correct, there's a part where Aristotle talks about plant being, animal being, and human being. What is plant being? I don't even necessarily know if I remember. I think it's like, those would be the 3 types of life. So it's like, plants, desire to stay alive or something like that. I'm sorry, I don't remember exactly. But then, it's not really relevant to what I'm saying, because the important thing is plants desire to stay alive or are alive in some sense. Then animals are alive and also move or have motility, right? So they have both the thing that's in plants and something else above it. And then humans they are alive, they have motility, they move, and they also have rationality. They also think. So you see how each one is like, for Aristotle, like stacked. They all have something in common, but it adds something more at each level. I really do think, AGDQ is going on right now. Super cool. I haven't been watching actually, but I forgot that it was. That's kind of what Heidegger has in mind here in terms of how to think about the artwork, I think. Right? The thing, an artwork is like a thing, but it also has allegory added on top of it. Maybe. Don't take that as an absolute definition of Heidegger's idea of the artwork. For one thing, it's not his definition. But why you break it down in this way is sort of just taking that mode of doing philosophy in a sort of Aristotelian way of trying to work your way back to what is the most essential element, or not the most essential, but the one that's at every layer. And then, artwork would be not a thing, but atop a thing, or something like that. It would be a thing which also has allegory, or something like that. And then that's when you get the discussion of things also, where breaking down the things, you have to ask, what is he talks about how the word thing has been expanded to the point of essentially meaninglessness, because it applies to literally every entity in the world, from rocks to hammers to animals to humans to God to death to abstract concepts, like death, or like 3 + 5. It's become meaninglessly overblown. But you could think of those things as having some basic thingness and then something else added on top, right? Organizing it in that Aristotelian way so that the word thing is no longer meaningless. And that's what he's trying to do. And that's how he comes up with, which is something I couldn't quite understand, the mere thing, the most fundamental thing. And, he's given us the empirical examples, which are, inert, naturally occurring objects like rocks or something like that. The rock is kind of the best example to think of what he has in mind by the mere thing. And then he's still working out how we can actually define that. But by going through the classical definitions of those things. But in the end, finding out probably they're not going to be correct. If you haven't been watching the previous ones, what I just said, or you haven't read the essay before, what I just said won't really mean anything to you. But that's okay, because like I said, in a second, we're going to do a quick overview of everything we've done so far in the essay. Hello, we're back. So like I said, I don't know how long we'll go today, but I at least want to do the quick recap and also mention some things that are clarified as a result of learning Aristotle, learning some things about Aristotle. Certainly not learning Aristotle as a whole. Or even in that deep of a way, but learning at least a little bit about Aristotle. But the other thing that I want to do is I want to no, I just want to do the recap. What am I saying? I was thinking about maybe, gaming a little bit also. I don't know. The only thing is that my headset has been broken for a minute. I haven't decided yet. I'm torn because I could just buy a new one, but these are so nice and it wouldn't be impossible to repair them. I mean, the sound still works, but the band is broken. And so the alternative is that I've just been using these VE Monks, which are okay, I mean, they're what I would use anyway for because I walk around and listen to stuff, and I don't want to use expensive headphones walking around listening to stuff. And these are, as far as $10 headphones go, quite good. But that's all I've been using now. Those have been broken, and even these are broken now. This particular pair, it only is in one ear, so the idea of playing one-eared Valorant is pretty silly. But who knows? Maybe I'll play a little bit. But first things first. Let's at least do this catching up on Heidegger, on the origin of the work of art specifically. So I wrote this up just to help myself make sense of the essay and what we've done so far. So it's a good recap if you've been following along the whole time, or if this is your first time watching this. I mean, you can watch the VODs on YouTube also, but edited VODs. Just to be clear, it's not like an unedited. That would be horrible. But also instead of watching the VODs, you could be with me right now while I quickly go over the moves of the essay. So the first one is this. The goal, sorry, it's not typing. The goal is to talk about, okay, sorry, that's not gonna, how do I make sure that shows up? Much better. Except that, yeah, I didn't really think this one through, did I? The goal is to talk about sorry. That's not what this is at all. The goal is to ask after, which is a phrase that Heidegger uses all the time. I think essentially to say something like like what he's talking about. The question is in search of something and being in time. He says that the question is looking for something, so to speak, is seeking something. And so this is the question, what is thought, or what is sought by the question. Okay, there we go. That's going to work. Sorry about the struggles with that there. The goal is to ask after the origin of the work of art. What is the source of its essence? All right, so that's a question that I think is a little bit still open. Why, for Heidegger, the definition is what is the origin? I thought that looking at the four causes might help us, the Aristotelian four causes, and it somewhat did, but not completely. Yeah, essentially to ask what is the essential source is to say what gives the artwork, which is a way of saying, what is its being, like being in the grand sense of being in time. What is the larger unity of which it takes part or something? And the answer, well, we'll see, turns out. Well, the first thought is that it must be the artist. Why am I jumping ahead? It must be the artist. No, he says, because there cannot be an artist without artworks, right? You don't become an artist unless there are artworks that you've made. So there's a kind of circular thing. We are going in a circle. But number 3. So there must be some prior category called art. Is art what comes after artworks as the sum total of works? That's a question that Heidegger asks, right? Art is just, art is all the artworks added up together. Or does it come before works? And of course, obviously, he thinks, yes, it comes before works. Ultimately. But, right now, at this part of the essay, it's an open question. To answer this, we must look at actual artworks and attempt to find art in them. So that's like what I was talking about earlier with my paint drawing, right? You have to look, drill in phenomenologically, which is in a way is a kind of empiricism. I believe Deleuze says that, into the particular artwork itself to work your way up to the art that prevails in them, that has given them. If we ask what artworks are, we first notice their thingliness. I.e., the example he gives is soldiers carry around Hölderlin's hymns in their backpack, right? It's in a way it's kind of funny, but it's also like literally true, right? They whether you read them or not, Hölderlin's hymns are things that take up space in the world. Of course, the question would be if Hölderlin's hymns were only remembered but not written down, would they still be things? That's a question. But to see if this is true, we must first ask what things are, right? That thing I just asked now seems like a very serious problem to me. What about the poem that exists only in memory? Well, anyway, number 5. The thing has imposed itself as the standard for all beings, and this even taken to be obvious, right? It's this is something that Heidegger claims. All beings or all entities have been understood as things. The example, he says, the thing is defined as all that is not simply nothing. In a weird sense that even the nothing could end up being a thing, perhaps. But if we trace it back to the 3 major thing concepts from ancient Greek thought, we can see that this particular historical idea, that this is a particular historical idea which has become so diluted and ossified that it seems obvious, right? That its historical constructedness seems lost, and it seems as if it were just natural that things are these thing concepts, but in fact they have a specific historical root in ancient Greek thought. However, we can draw this definition back, right? We can pare it back, might be a better word. Right, so that it doesn't just become so all-encompassing as of what counts as a thing so as to be meaningless. It seems that we hesitate to call beings with life things if really pressed to think about it. And indeed, that a thing seems to have a diminutive basic quality is what I wrote. I don't know. What I meant is that a thing... I don't like that way that I put it. I wrote this on an airplane. That the thing is something basic, right? It's a fundamental thing. It's not things on top, right? And this is where Aristotle helps us, right? Like we're saying, the thing, you kind of have these qualities that build up in a kind of constructive way, and the thing must be that basic element that could be kind of quote unquote in all things that we call things, but in all entities. But nonetheless, there's a difference between the thingly the element within the larger things, and the thing and the other things that make them up. And so I'm using the word thing in the wrong way in this very discussion. But that we could figure out what a thing is by focusing in on the mere thing. So perhaps, even if we call God, humans, and animals things, we mean only that a thing is a base to which something else is added. That mere base would give us the mere thing, and perhaps also equipment, right? So at first in the essay, he makes it seem like also equipment could meet this definition, but later, as we know, even equipment turns out to be not just a mere thing. And so then we get the three ideas from ancient Greek thought. The first idea, substance with accidents, is wrong because, one, it destroys the thing by causing the thing to become an inaccessible core, nothing like the thing as one encounters it. In other words, right, the thing in this like rationalist move becomes totally inaccessible. It becomes this kind of, positable, thinkable maybe core, but nothing which is available or present literally just to say you can't go up and pick up a granite and say, yes, this is a substance, right? Because literally the substance is inaccessible. You can only access the accidents, right? So that, and is where it, quote unquote, does a violence to the thing. And two, the definition is so broad as to be meaningless. Indeed, it is a symptom of the process by which all beings are taken to be things. The second idea, sum of sensations, which is more of an empiricist as opposed to rationalist view, is wrong because, one, it holds the thing too close to really see it, abstracting it into mere sensations without understanding the thing as it is, right? This is where Heidegger says you don't, see green patch and then, turn it into next to brown patch in shaped triangle and go, oh, I'm looking at a mountain. You see, and in seeing, you see a mountain, right? This is Heidegger's claim. And so in that sense, the thing is also lost in the other way, whereas in the first case, the thing is inaccessible because it's just totally pushed away from all human sensation. In the second one, the thing is pushed so closely up to your eyes that you can't even see it anymore as what it is, as in its form, and the kind of gestalt way in which it becomes intelligible. And two, again, too broad to be meaningless. I would say it's to be meaningful. The third idea, which is what we were just looking at for Aristotle, the hypokeimenon, formed matter, does understand the thing as thing, so avoids the first objection, right? In literal sense that, it's a piece of matter that you're holding, right? In this sensuous way, unlike the inaccessible core of the first idea, right? It's literally the, dirt that I'm holding in my hands. But it's also, unlike the second one, it has a form, right? I hold it at the right distance to perceive it as what it is, right? So it avoids the first objection that the other two have fallen prey to, that it somehow does a violence to the thing. But two, it is, again, too broad to be meaningless. In other words, like we were just talking about with Aristotle, you could really describe everything as formed matter. It's not a sufficiently clarified position. But then Heidegger says, he also says this. Heidegger wonders however, whether it might be drawn back or pared back, right? Could we still have this idea of formed matter and clarify it more specifically to just the realm of mere things? So he says, if we do, since we've decided the mere things are both equipment and like natural objects, so if we apply it to mere things and equipment, we can ask to which it essentially belongs, right? And of course, I talked about this earlier, but this is going to be the problem with this, where it seems fine and it turns out to be a problem. And this is for the reasons I was just talking about, right? It makes perfect sense to talk about the efficient cause of the hammer as someone building it because they want to hammer things, its final cause. And it also makes perfect sense to say that the material is the wood and the stone that is formed into the shape of axe. But when you start talking about mere things, it really does not make sense. What matter is a rock made of? For one thing, because Aristotle doesn't want to go down like a subatomic particle route or something like that. And even if you do, it seems like you have the risk of an infinite regress. Like, how can you really stop things in any way? Why does it make sense even to think in those terms that nothing is real except subatomic particles or something like that? So it just really starts not working well when you get to mere things. And then also, what is the efficient cause? Like, who made the rock, right? I mean, who, God, maybe, if you want to do that. But I would say most people don't. Well, not most people, but anyone who's not religious doesn't. So whereas it works so naturally with equipment, it feels rough with mere things, right? So whether we agree with it or not, it seems most meaningful in the context of equipment. When matter is formed into a useful form, right? It essentially has the character of use. So it must belong there. So the question here at this point in the essay is not even whether foreign matter can explain mere things, though. It's in which realm does it originate, right? So the point is just that it originates in the realm of equipment because it's so intuitive in the realm of equipment. That's obviously must be where, say, Aristotle came up with the idea of formed matter, was to explain equipment and not to explain mere things. So then when you start applying that to mere things, you're tearing a mode of thinking out of its essential realm in the realm of equipment and putting it into the realm of mere things. So that's what we're doing there before we even get to the next step. And so from here, this is where Heidegger sets up the spectrum. With this, we can set up a spectrum. Mere things, which are self-contained. It seems like that might also be said as useless. And not made. Although I don't think, let's not put that in there because I don't think Heidegger says that, at least at this point. But that's one way of interpreting it. Self-contained. It's not toward some other end, or it's not bound up in the world of use. It is a thing in itself. Not in the Kantian sense, but just it's not for something else. And it's not made by humans. It just shows up in the world. Equipment, which is not self-contained because it exists as a relation of use, which is what I put in there. It exists as a relation of use and made, and artworks, which are self-contained, right? Again, they're not useful, in the way that a hammer is. An artwork doesn't do something specific in the context of particular human plan, and they are made, right? So artworks are this kind of weird thing where they're like the mere thing in the sense that they're useless and self-contained, but they're like equipment in the sense that they're made by humans and not naturally occurring. In this sense, form matter makes sense as a way to access the being of equipment. But when this is transported either to mere things or to artworks, something is lost. We do this, however, this probably should have been a new bullet point, but because equipment is what is closest to us. We are most closely enmeshed in the world with what is useful, right? So, this is going back to this kind of, being in time point about what philosophers do with hammers, where they sit in their armchair and ask, what is a hammer? Is a secondary rather than primary approach to the way that hammers actually show up or reveal themselves in the world, which is in the context of use, right? You use a hammer, and that is what makes a hammer what it is its usefulness. And this is the most primary way we exist in the world is with projects and plans, with care and concern, being involved in activity, using things in a literal sense. So to ask something like, or rather to ask what is an artwork or what is a mere thing, right? We jump already to comparing it to what is most close to us, right? And this is something that Heidegger is always concerned with the closeness. What is closest to us? What is closest to us is equipment, so we have a tendency to turn artwork into equipment. And you can see how, assuming that Heidegger's right, that artwork is not equipment, but that we do treat it as equipment, you can see this play out. I mean, whether it's people who talk as if artwork is about generating pleasure, to the sense that there's really no meaningful difference between, say, an artwork and a feel-good pill that you can take or something. It's just about a dopamine squirt or something, right? That's turning artwork into equipment, right? The purpose of producing pleasure or something, right? But that's certainly not how Heidegger thinks about art. And to be honest, I don't think it's how art is, and I also don't think really, truly it explains the reason that anyone cares about art. But that's getting a little off the topic. But the point is that would be a way that art is turned into equipment and thus robbed from what it in fact does. So number 12, thus the only sense in which form matter could explain mere things is by stripping away their equipmental nature and seeing what we're left with, right? So in other words, since we can see, right, that mere things are not equipment, and that we transpose the form matter thinking onto mere things from equipment, the only way, since equipment is something over and above the mere thing, right, it has the property of being made for, or not the property, but the fact of being made for usefulness added to it, we would have to strip that away, remember, to get back in this Aristotelian way to the thing that's preserved at the different levels, to strip it back to what we're left with after we take away equipmentality. And the point, it looks like, is that the form matter distinction actually can't tell us anything very useful once we strip that away. But of course, this tells us nothing about the thingly character of the thing. Thus, this too finally does a violence to the thing. So, the reason for trying to pair the form matter distinction back to equipment was to equipment and mere things was to see if we could avoid the second objection that it's so broad as to be meaningless. But in the process of doing that, we found out that not only is it still too broad to be meaningless, it actually does, although it seemed at first that it didn't, it does fall victim to the first objection. That in fact, it does do a violence to the thing because it turns the thing into equipment. The mere thing cannot remain its thingliness. It can only be understood in the context of human usefulness. Right? It can only be something that is useful. And that finally is all the thing can be under the form-matter distinction. So now we've rejected all three concepts. So 1 second. Right, he's talking about here how like the difference between what form would mean in the case of a mere thing and what it would mean in the case of equipment, right? In the mere thing, form means here the distribution and arrangement of material parts in spatial locations, resulting in a particular shape, namely that of a block. But a jug, an axe, a shoe are also matter occurring in a form. Form as shape is not the consequence here of a prior distribution of the matter. The form, on the contrary, determines the arrangement of the matter. Even more, it prescribes in each case the kind and selection of the matter. Impermeable for a jug, sufficiently hard for an axe, firm yet flexible for shoes, the interfusion of form and matter prevailing here is, moreover, controlled beforehand by the purposes served by jug, axe, shoes. Such usefulness is never assigned or added on afterward to a being of the type of a jug, axe, or pair of shoes, but neither is it something that floats somewhere above it as an end. Right? I mean, that's the four causes right there. The matter, the final cause is usefulness, right? And a particular type of usefulness in the case of where usefulness is the essential source, that is equipmentality, and usefulness is chopping wood, right? And so that's the final cause. So the efficient cause is the person selecting material, right? Which is the material cause. That is, sufficiently hard, for example. So it's determined by the final cause, right? The efficient cause is someone wants to cut wood. So it's also determined by the final cause. And it's also the form is determined by the final cause, right? It's put in such a form that it can chop wood. So all of those things are tied to equipment, which is the exact opposite of what form might mean in the case of the mere thing. And I notice now how carefully this description is, right? So he doesn't have to say, God formed it or someone formed it. Form means here the distribution and arrangement of the material parts in spatial locations, right? So you can at least say there's form and matter there, but can you really put it in terms of final cause? It doesn't seem like it. Right, usefulness is the basic feature from which this being regards us. That is, flashes at us and thereby is present, and thus is this being, right? The final cause, in a certain sense, is the essential source that gives equipment. A piece of equipment, a pair of shoes, for instance, is also self-contained, like the mere thing, but it does not have the character of having taken shape by itself, like the granite boulder. So maybe self-contained was the wrong word to say here, because it does say self-contained, right? But it does not have the character of taking shape by itself. Right, so there's what I was just talking about in terms of the kind of spectral relation between mere thing, equipment, and artwork. Are to be comprehended with the help of the being of equipment. Right. So, things and works, and ultimately all beings are, there's a reason also that on the spectrum, equipment is in the middle, because it's what's closest to us. The same way that, in a certain sense, in the Aristotelian way, mortals are between God and nothing, between actuality and death. We're closest there with equipment in our projects, between work and mere thing. And then, of course, there's this bit about the way in which the kind of, God as creator or as craftsman leads, additional arguments for this view from Christian faith, or the biblical faith is what it says here. And also, Aquinas' own application of Aristotle to the world to turn everything into the materia formed by God. Right, and so here's talking about how, even when we transition into modern philosophy and in a certain way abandon the kind of explicitly Christian view of Aquinas or the scholastics, this idea of creation can still play a role or remain a force in philosophical thinking, right? And so that's how you get something he's suggesting like Kantian transcendental thinking, where you're maybe not God is forming the world, but the transcendental subject is forming the world, right? Everything is created for the subject, right? It's a equipmentalizing of all beings. And so, but here's where we can start properly reading again. We actually got into the artwork, but we'll do this whole artwork section again. The situation stands revealed as soon as we speak of things in the proper sense as mere things. The mere, after all, means the removal of the character of usefulness and of being made. The mere thing is a sort of equipment, albeit equipment denuded of its equipmental being. Thing being consists in what is then left over. So in a certain sense, now we've actually clarified what the mere thing is, right? Because equipment is that which flashes the property or the idea of usefulness, and so to work down to the thingly quality, what the mere thing in fact is. In fact, now that we've discovered that equipment is that which flashes usefulness at us, the mere thing must be that which is without life. We already worked down to that, and also is without usefulness. But the remnant is not actually, well, and also it's different than the artwork, so it's not made either. But this remnant is not actually defined in its ontological character. It remains doubtful whether the thingly character comes into view at all in the process of stripping off everything equipmental. Thus, the third mode of interpretation of the thing, that which follows the lead of the matter-form structure, also turns out to be an assault upon the thing. These three modes of defining thingness conceive of the thing as a bearer of traits, as the unity of a manifold of sensations, as formed matter. In the course of the history of truth about beings, the interpretations mentioned have also entered into combinations, a matter we may now pass over. In such combinations, they have further strengthened their innate tendency to expand so as to apply in the same way to thing, to equipment, and to work. Thus they give rise to a mode of thought by which we think not only about thing, equipment, and work, but about all beings in general. This long familiar mode of thought preconceives all immediate experience of beings. The preconception shackles reflection on the being of any given being. Thus it comes about that prevailing thing concepts obstruct the way toward the thingly character of the thing, as well as toward the equipmental character of equipment, and all the more toward the workly character of the work, right? So we had to go through the thing concepts to see how the thing is not any of those, but how they seem to not seem like thing concepts, but obvious definitions that in fact emerge from history and also are wrong. This is why it is necessary to know about these thing concepts, in order thereby to take heed of their provenance and their boundless presumption, but also of their semblance of self-evidence. This knowledge becomes all the more necessary when we risk the attempt to bring to view and express in words the thingly character of the thing, the equipmental character of equipment, and the workly character of the work. To this end, however, only one element is needful: to keep at a distance all the preconceptions and assaults of the above modes of thought, to leave the thing to rest in its own self, for instance, in its thing being. What seems easier than to let a thing be just the being that it is? Or does this turn out to be the most difficult of tasks, particularly if such an intention, to let a being be as it is, represents the opposite of the indifference that simply turns its back upon the being itself in favor of an unexamined concept of being? We ought to turn toward the being, think about it in regard to its being, but by means of this thinking at the same time let it rest upon itself in its very own essence. Why did that go so fast? Sorry. Right, so I mean, we already talked about this last time, and I've talked about this enough, I didn't really want to. It's old news at this point. I'm a little bored by it, but there's this idea of letting the thing be, right? Where you, rather than bringing your concepts to it, right? You cut away all your concepts and allow the thing to show up for you from itself. This exertion of thought seems to meet with its greatest resistance in defining the thingness of the thing. For where else could the cause lie of the failure of the efforts mentioned? The unpretentious thing evades thought most stubbornly. Or can it be that this self-refusal of the mere thing, this self-contained, irreducible spontaneity, belongs precisely to the essence of the thing? Must not this strange and uncommunicative feature of the essence of the thing become intimately familiar to thought that tries to think the thing? If so, then we should not force our way to its thingly character. I'm going to read the next paragraph and then come back. That the thingness of the thing is particularly difficult to express and only seldom expressible is infallibly documented by the history of its interpretation indicated above. This history coincides with the destiny in accordance with which Western thought has hitherto thought the being of beings, right? In the sense that Western thought has turned all beings into things. However, not only do we now establish this point, At the same time, we discover a clue in this history. Is it an accident that in the interpretation of the thing, the view that takes matter and form as guide attains special dominance? This definition of the thing derives from an interpretation of the equipmental being of equipment. An equipment, having come into being through human making, is a being particularly familiar to human thinking. At the same time, this being that is so familiar in its being has a peculiar intermediate position between thing and work. We shall follow this clue and search first for the equipmental character of equipment. Perhaps this will suggest something to us about the thingly character of the thing and the workly character of the work. We must only avoid making thing and work prematurely into subspecies of equipment. We are disregarding the possibility, however, that differences relating to the essential history of being may yet also be present in the way equipment is. I don't remember feeling that this part was particularly difficult, but it seems difficult right now. So there's this question, is the thing in some sense uncommunicative, and is it part of what a thing is, that it's resistant to being thought? Is that part of what a thing is? And in that sense, would it be a mistake in terms of letting the thing be to try to force our way into the thing concept? Maybe. I guess that's really all I can say. I think that might be something that will, if we keep going and come back later, it'll make sense what he means by that. But so we have to, let the thing be, of course. That the thingness of the thing is particularly difficult to express and only seldom expressible is infallibly documented by the history of its interpretation indicated above. This history coincides. We got that part. Let things be, let things be, let things be. Is it an accident that in the interpretation of the thing, the view that takes matter and form as guide attains special dominance? Equipment takes special dominance because it's the one we're closest to, as we already talked about. And it's in the middle of the spectrum. So in a certain sense, if we're thinking of it in this Aristotelian way of building layers, the mere thing is that which is not made and what's the other one? Not made and self-contained. Equipment is that which is made and not self-contained. The artwork is that which is made and self-contained. So if you could think about what is equipment, then maybe you could subtract that. Right? Well, I don't know. I think that's what he's going for. But he said earlier that's not what he wants to do. I guess just basically, let's ask what the equipment is and see if that shows us something about what things are. But I don't understand why it would do that. So I guess that's a problem for me right now. But it didn't seem like a problem before, so I don't know if I'm just tired or what. Or seeing more now. Perhaps this will suggest something to us about the thingly character of the thing and the workly character of the work. We must only avoid making thing and work prematurely into subspecies of equipment. We are disregarding the possibility, however, that differences relating to the essential history of being may yet also be present in the way equipment is. I think the essential history of being is the stuff that he develops elsewhere, the historical epochs of being, but we just gotta let it be. That was Iro Nareth on YouTube. Fingerstyle, let it be. You should check it out. Perhaps this will suggest, as long as equipment doesn't take, the problem I guess would be if equipment took the central concern of our investigation, and thus was not work and thing were just reduced to subcategories of equipment. But they aren't. We aren't going to do that. Heidegger's not going to do that, and we, along with Heidegger, are not going to, I think, is what he's saying here, really. But what path leads to the equipmental quality of equipment? How shall we discover what a piece of equipment truly is? The procedure necessary at present must plainly avoid any attempts that again immediately entail the encroachments of the usual interpretations, right? Of course, we already know they're bad, and also we're trying to let the thing be rather than force our thing concepts on top of it. We are most easily insured against this if we simply describe some equipment without any philosophical theory, the phenomenological part of this. We choose as example a common sort of equipment, a pair of peasant shoes. We do not even need to exhibit actual pieces of this sort of useful article in order to describe them. Everyone is acquainted with them. Right? But since it is a matter here of, everyone knows what shoes are, right? But since it is a matter here of direct description, it may be well to facilitate the visual realization of them. For this purpose, a pictorial representation suffices. It seems to me, I mean, this is the kind of the game of it being considering the artwork, but it seems to me that it would be much better to use some actual shoes, some actual equipment, instead of a work, which we've already decided is not equipment, to try to figure out what equipment is. At least intuitively. I know why. The answer is ultimately that art can show us what things are. But, pre being convinced by this essay or something, I don't think I would think it was obvious that a pictorial representation would suffice. We shall choose a well-known painting by Van Gogh, who painted such shoes several times. But what is there to see here? Everyone knows what shoes consist of. If they are not wooden or bast shoes, there will be leather soles and uppers joined together by thread and nails. Such gear serves to clothe the feet, right? So it has a useful purpose right there, clothing the feet. And that's its material purpose also. Or sorry, its material cause rather. And this is their final cause. Depending on the use to which the shoes are to be put, whether for work in the field or for dancing, matter and form will differ, right? There's all the Aristotelian final four causes in there. Such statements, no doubt correct, only explicate what we already know. The equipmental quality of equipment consists in its usefulness. But what about this usefulness itself? In conceiving it, do we already conceive along with it the equipmental character of equipment? In order to succeed in doing this, must we not look out for useful equipment in its use? The peasant woman wears her shoes in the field. Only here are they what they are. So that's what I was talking about earlier when, which seems like is actually there in Aristotle, the axe is only the axe when it's chopping wood. The field shoes are only the field shoes when they are in the field, right? That's like kind of their completion in a teleological way. They are all the more genuinely so, the less the peasant woman thinks about the shoes while she is at work, or looks at them at all, or is even aware of them. She stands and walks in them. That is how shoes actually serve. It is in this process of the use of equipment that we must actually encounter the character of equipment. The point from being in time, in other words. We can't say what are shoes by looking at them from our armchair. We have to see them in the world to be using them. And in fact, they disappear, right? This is the whole point. When you're actually using the shoes, you barely notice you're wearing them. They disappear into their use rather than when they become present at hand through their contemplation of them or something like that. As long as we only imagine a pair of shoes in general, or simply look at the empty, unused shoes as they merely stand there in the picture, we shall never discover what the equipmental being of the equipment in truth is. From Van Gogh's painting, we cannot even tell where these shoes stand. There is nothing surrounding this pair of peasant shoes in or to which they might belong, only an undefined space. There are not even clods of soil from the field or the field path sticking to them, which would at least hint at their use. A pair of peasant shoes and nothing more. And yet, right? A very poetic and yet. And like I did last time, we should actually, I think I realized at the same time last time, we should have the actual painting up while we look at this. Okay. So yeah, that's the painting that we're talking about. As long as we only imagine a pair of shoes in general, right, rather than this specific pair of shoes, right, we can't actually learn anything about them, right? These shoes that we're looking at right above me on the screen are not out in the field. And because they're not out in the field, these shoes can't be what they are, right? The shoes have to be in the field being used, disappearing in their use to be useful. So it seems that looking at this painting by Van Gogh of these shoes above my head can't tell us anything about the equipmental being, except Heidegger says, and yet. So let's see why he says and yet. From the dark opening of the worn insides of the shoes, the toilsome tread of the worker stares forth. Right? Inside the shoes, the tread of the worker stares forth. We actually see it because the shoes are worn. We see that they're not new shoes, right? They've actually been worn by the worker who wears them or who uses them, right? So we've learned at least one thing about what the shoes are, right? They're not just any shoe in general. They're a particular shoe that someone who owns them has used extensively, which is why they're worn. In the stiffly rugged heaviness of the shoes, there's the accumulated tenacity of her slow trudge through the far-spreading and ever-uniform furrows of the field swept by a raw wind. On the leather lie the dampness and richness of the soil. You can see, I guess, like mud marks on the soil. On the shoes, rather. Under the soles stretches the loneliness of the field path as evening falls. In the shoes vibrates the silent call of the earth, its quiet gift of the ripening grain, and its unexplained self-refusal in the fallow desolation of the wintry field. This equipment is pervaded by uncomplaining worry as to the certainty of bread, the wordless joy of having once more withstood want, the trembling before the impending childbed and shivering at the surrounding menace of death. The equipment belongs to the earth, and it is protected in the world of the peasant woman. From out of the protected belonging, the equipment itself rises to its resting within itself. All right, so it gets a little complicated in that last sentence there. But the idea, I think, is rather clear, that the shoes actually aren't just shoes when you look at this painting. They aren't just an object like any pair of shoes. You can actually see and you can, imagine, bring forth the entire world of the woman who owns these shoes. You can see her working the fields every day or every day that is necessary, right? You can see her, worry, the human agrarian worry of having good crop this year, the joy of having withstood want, right? The concern for the child. This whole life comes forth out of these shoes, which is to say the whole world. The world, remember, for Heidegger, is the lived set of total meanings that make up your being alive, your life, right? So it's actually different than the earth. The earth is the possibility out of which, or atop which, the world stands. And I think I remember last time also I got caught up on this resting within itself. So the earth is protected in the world of the peasant woman. So the equipment rises to its resting within itself. Is to say the equipment arises out of the, well, not even out of the earth, but out of this relationship between world and earth, where world protects the earth. So for equipment to rest within itself, okay, I got it. For equipment to rest within itself is when equipment is disappears in use, when equipment is what it is, when you let equipment be. And when you let equipment be is when it plays its role of usefulness within this relationship between world and earth. And that's what it means for it to be resting within itself. But perhaps it is only in the picture that we notice all this about the shoes. Right, so I think that's how we're going to get the sense of the special role that the artwork plays. It's in the picture that we notice this. The peasant woman, on the other hand, simply wears them. If only this simple wearing were so simple. When she takes off her shoes late in the evening, in deep but healthy fatigue, and reaches out for them again in the still dim dawn, or passes them by on the day of rest, she knows all this without noticing or reflecting. Right? This is that being and time distinction again. The equipmental being of the equipment consists indeed in its usefulness, but this usefulness itself rests in the abundance of an essential being of the equipment. Wait, so the equipment rests in the usefulness, but usefulness rests in the essential being of the equipment. So it kind of, I guess it goes both ways. We call it reliability. By virtue of this reliability, the peasant woman is made privy to the silent call of the earth. By virtue of the reliability of the equipment, she is sure of her world. World and earth exist for her and for those who are with her in the mode. There's a fly. By virtue of this reliability, the peasant woman is made privy to the silent call of the earth. By virtue of the reliability of the equipment, she is sure of her world. Sorry, I already read that. World and earth exist for her and for those who are with her in her mode of being only thus, in the equipment. We say only and therewith fall into error. For the reliability of the equipment first gives to the simple world its security and assures to the earth the freedom of its steady thrust. This fly is so annoying. The equipmental being of the equipment consists indeed in its usefulness. Yeah, I guess I think what's going on there is that it's like both ways, right? Usefulness rests on its being a right that I think one way to think of it might be in the like McLuhan sense, where McLuhan says this is like kind of seems like really different, but I think it might be related. Like, you know, rather than the idea that the light bulb, everyone was sitting around being like, it sucks I have to go to bed at 8 p.m. I wish I could just, you know, wake up at 2 p.m. and go to bed at 4 a.m. In fact, no one would even think of that until someone invents a light bulb to fulfill that desire. Instead, no one would even think of that desire before a light bulb. So in a certain sense, the causality goes the other way, right? The light bulb opens the possibility of staying up late and changes the world that you were the world in the Heideggerian sense, the world that you live in, the particular sort of possibilities, desires you have, and decisions you feel are available to you as choices are changed. It seems like you might think of it this way. On the one hand, yes, what makes the shoes is their usefulness, right? The shoes are created so that someone can, till the fields or whatever. But the shoes, along with the other, necessary instruments for agrarian life, are what even make possible the ability of farming, right? So it's like each relies on the other. There's a kind of circular reciprocal relationship there. So equipment is directed towards usefulness, but usefulness as a possibility arises out of reliability, I think is the way to think about it. By virtue of this reliability, the peasant woman is made privy to the silent call of the earth. By virtue of the reliability of the equipment, she is sure of her world. Yeah, that's right, because that's exactly what it means. So the reliability of the equipment, she is sure of her world. This world, the world of farming, is opened by equipment. Right? It's to be made privy to hear the silent call of the earth. Right? The call, it sounds like, is to, preserve the earth, to tend to the fields, which is something that equipment makes possible. World and earth, yeah, I'm pretty confident about that reading. World and earth exist for her and for those who are with her in her mode of being only thus, in the equipment. Right? The equipment is what make that mode of being possible. We say only and therewith fall into error. For the reliability of the equipment first gives to the simple world its security and assures to the earth the freedom of its steady thrust. Right? So, only isn't in a dismissive way. It's just that, the reliability of the equipment gives the simple world its security. The equipmental being of equipment, reliability, keeps gathered within itself all things according to their manner and extent. So I guess it's like, it's a little bit like being and beings. We have reliability and usefulness, right? So reliability gives usefulness. Keeps gathered within itself all things according to their manner and extent. The usefulness of equipment is nevertheless only the essential consequence of reliability. The former vibrates in the latter and would be nothing without it. A single piece of equipment is worn out and used up, but at the same time the use itself also falls into disuse, wears away, and becomes usual. Right, so yeah, this is that reciprocal relationship. Reliability gives usefulness, but it would be nothing if it wasn't useful. Since we're on this circle, we get how it works, right? Something wouldn't be useful if it wasn't reliable. If the second you use it, it breaks. It's actually not useful. To put it in simple terms. A single piece of equipment is worn out and used up, but at the same time, the use itself also falls into disuse, wears away, and becomes usual. Thus, equipmentality wastes away, sinks into mere stuff. In such wasting, reliability vanishes. This dwindling, however, to which use things owe their boringly obtrusive usualness, is only one more testimony to the original essence of equipmental being. The worn-out usualness of the equipment then obtrudes itself as the sole mode of being, apparently peculiar to it exclusively. Only blank usefulness now remains visible. It awakens the impression that the origin of equipment lies in a mere fabricating that impresses a form upon some matter. Nevertheless, in its genuinely equipmental being, equipment stems from a more distant source. Matter and form and their distinction have a deeper origin. Let me just check how much is left. Okay. So I think what we're just saying here is how you end up in the forgetting of reliability or something. So say if you use a hammer till it breaks, I think is what this means here. A single piece of equipment is worn out and used up. But at the same time, the use itself also falls into disuse, wears away, and becomes usual. Oh, this is okay. This is a little bit what I was talking about with the McLuhan thing, I think. right, then in a certain sense, I don't even know. So he's saying, like, I think what this means is, yeah, it can break, but also you can just sort of stop using it, in the sense that, your shoes might sit unused, or in the sense that, it becomes unnecessary, or for whatever reason, the importance of the reliability of the world in which these shoes live, how they are kind of drawn away in one way or another from that world, they sink into mere stuff. In such wasting, reliability vanishes. And we should probably look up, define stuff. I didn't say stuffy. Draw together is the, or material, are the etymologies we have here. So then if we look at, let's do this so you guys can actually see this. Reliability. We don't have an etymology on that one, unless we tried doing it this way. Yeah. We don't have an etymology. If we went to Wiktionary, we'd probably get it. Equipment. I don't know if these are helping us necessarily, so, but there's a real sense, I guess, here that if it falls into stuff, into mere, what was it, like things gathered together or stuck together, it loses its the world, right? The world that it safeguards, so to speak. This dwindling, however, to which use things owe their boringly obtrusive usualness. I don't know here if what we're talking about is shoes breaking and seeking to be useful, or the world changing in a way that shoes are no longer useful, or if it's that the shoes are still useful, but we just don't think about them or pay attention to them. I'm not sure which one of those two it is. But either way, I think you can see how it leads to this argument, which is that like I was talking with the McLuhan thing, it seems as if someone just created the shoes for the purpose of usefulness, just bare usefulness, without realizing that, in fact, there was a world of reliability, which first is why the shoes were first made. That's the first point of the shoes being made. So there's this reciprocal relationship, right? It's not just a mere use thing. It's a world in which they have their use. The worn-out usualness of the equipment then obtrudes itself as the sole mode of being, apparently peculiar to it exclusively. Only blank usefulness now remains visible. It awakens the impression that the origin of equipment lies in a mere fabricating that impresses a form upon some matter. That's what I'm talking about, that it's a fabricating, that it's just one person, making or impressing a form on a matter, rather than that there's this kind of reciprocal relationship where the form is also given by the world. The origin of fabricate is fabrica, something skillfully produced. Nevertheless, in its genuinely equipmental being, equipment stems from a more distant source. Matter and form and their distinction have a deeper origin. We're always going deeper, deeper and deeper and deeper. Oh, were you playing Halo Infinite? Nice. The repose of equipment resting within itself consists in its reliability. Only in this reliability do we discern what equipment in truth is, but we still know nothing of what we first sought, the thing's thingly character, and we know nothing at all of what we really and solely seek, the workly character of the work in the sense of the work of art. Or have we already learned something unwittingly? Or is this just to say, we figured out what equipment is, but how did that help us with the thing? In passing, so to speak, about the work being of the work. The equipmental quality of equipment was discovered. But how? Not by a description and explanation of a pair of shoes actually present, not by a report about the process of making shoes, and also not by the observation of the actual use of shoes occurring here and there, but only by bringing ourselves before Van Gogh's painting. This painting spoke. In the nearness of the work, we were suddenly somewhere else than we usually tend to be. Right? So I think that's kind of the point of this thing about the usefulness of the thing withering away or something in losing its reliability, saying that, you know, we don't think about the reliability when we see the shoes every day. So I don't even think it's about shoes breaking. It's just about, you know, them disappearing in their use. They disappear into their use, which is to say they're part of the world rather than revealing the world. But that actually, by looking at the artwork, we stop and reflect on the shoes and see the world which they are a part of. And that's the sense in which this painting spoke. In the nearness of the work, we were suddenly somewhere else than we usually tend to be. The artwork lets us know what shoes are in truth. It would be the worst self-deception to think that our description, as a subjective action, had first depicted everything thus and then projected it into the painting. If anything is questionable here, it is rather that we experienced too little in the nearness of the work, and that we expressed the experience too crudely and too literally. Right, so I guess he's responding to someone who might say, well, the artwork didn't tell you that. You made that all up and then projected it onto the painting. But without really defending it, it seems like he's saying that would just be a self-deception, right? We could only have had these ideas, we being Heidegger, by seeing this painting and having this world revealed. If anything is questionable here, it is rather that we experience too little, right? And that we took it away too quickly. But above all, the work did not, as it might seem at first, serve merely for a better visualizing of what a piece of equipment is. Rather, the equipmentality of equipment first expressly comes to the fore through the work and only in the work. So in other words, it's not just that the shoes, you can get a good understanding by looking at them, but then the painting helped. It's that, in fact, in the world, they are, there's no access, right? They're either disappearing in use or, they're sitting on the shelf and you're either not thinking about them or you think of them as just usual everyday object. It is only in the artwork that that reliability comes out, right? In this sense, which is the, source of the equipmentality of equipment. What happens here? What is at work in the work? Van Gogh's painting is the disclosure of what the equipment, the pair of peasant shoes, is in truth. This being emerges into the unconcealment of its being. I was going to say another thing. The thing is also, right, that this, the art is the only way to know it, means that the philosopher sitting in their chair conceptualizing shoes, rather looking at them literally or just imagining them, is also not a possible way to access the what the shoes are, right? Their being, which being just means is or are. The only way is art. So that gives you a clue to the shift in Heidegger's thinking, where he shifts from writing a big book like Being and Time to writing these poetic circular essays. It turns out that it is only through art that the being of things can be revealed. Right? That's the key here, which is why his writing becomes more poetic than logical or philosophical. This being emerges into the unconcealment of its being through the painting. The Greeks called the unconcealment of beings aletheia. We say truth and think little enough in using this word. If there occurs in the work a disclosure of a particular being, disclosing what and how it is, then there is here an occurring, a happening of truth at work, right? That's that sense of aletheia that Heidegger's known for. That in the work, in the artwork, what equipment is being unconcealed, right? What the pair of peasant shoes, the specific equipment, is revealing. In the work of art, the truth of beings has set itself to work. To set means here to bring to stand. So the truth of beings is brought to stand. Some particular being, a pair of peasant shoes, comes in the work to stand in the light of its being. The being of beings comes into the steadiness of its shining. Right, and shining is tied in an important way to truth and to aletheia, to light. It comes to light, as the saying goes. And its being, I guess, is reliability, right? Is that right? The essence of art would then be this: the truth of being setting itself to work. But until now, art presumably has had to do with the beautiful and beauty, and not with truth. The arts that produce such works are called the fine arts, in contrast with the applied or industrial arts that manufacture equipments. In fine art, the art itself is not beautiful, but is called so because it produces the beautiful. Truth, in contrast, belongs to logic. Beauty, however, is reserved for aesthetics. But perhaps the proposition that art is truth setting itself to work intends to revive the fortunately obsolete view that art is an imitation and depiction of something actual. The reproduction of something at hand requires, to be sure, agreement with the actual being, adaptation to it. The Middle Ages called it quatio. I think in Latin it would be quatio. Aristotle already spoke of homoiosis. I don't know Greek pronunciation at all. Agreement with what, right? So, so Heidegger's saying, now art is taken as beauty, right? It produces the beautiful, which does sound like the useful, rather than the truth, which belongs to logic and philosophy and all that. But they're saying maybe it's trying to go back, I guess, way back in like ancient philosophy in the Middle Ages. There was some sense of art as mimesis or imitation. And in that sense, that could be a thought of truth. Agreement with what is has long been taken to be the essence of truth. But then, is it our opinion that this painting by Van Gogh depicts a pair of peasant shoes somewhere at hand and is a work of art because it does so successfully? Is it our opinion that the painting draws a likeness from something actual and transposes it into a product of artistic production? By no means. But Heidegger's rejecting that outright, that art is mimetic. The work, therefore, is not the reproduction of some particular entity that happens to be at hand at any given time. It is, on the contrary, the reproduction of things' general essence, right? It's not an actual mimetic reproduction of the shoes. It's a reproduction of their essence. And we've already defined essence for Heidegger as the essential source out of which something is given. But then where and how is this general essence so that artworks are able to agree with it? With what essence of what thing should a Greek temple agree? Who could maintain the impossible view that the idea of temple is represented in the building? And yet, truth is set to work in such a work, if it is a work. Truth is set to work in such a work, if it is a work. So, I mean, he's basically saying, okay, maybe you can explain this with the shoes, but how could architecture be representative of something, right? That doesn't seem to make sense. And yet he's going to explain truth is set to work in such a work if it is a work, right? A work is something which sets truth to work. So we'll have to keep reading to see how he's going to explain that with architecture. And there's a huge long part with the temple about this. Or let us think of Hölderlin's hymn, The Rhine. What is pre-given to the poet, and how is it given so that it can then be re-given in the poem, right? So sounds like in Charles Olson or something, where there's something given which gives itself to the poet, and then that kind of motion of the river hitting the poet is like bowling ball or billiard balls transferred to the poet to the poem, so that you have this something re-given in the poem that was first given to the poet. And if in the case of this hymn and similar poems, the idea of a copy relation between something already actual and the artwork clearly fails, the view that the work is a copy is confirmed in the best possible way by the work of the kind presented in C.F. Meyer's poem, Roman Fountain. I don't know who C.F. Meyer is. And if in the case of this hymn and similar poems, the idea of a copy relation between something already actual and the artwork clearly fails, let's read the poem. Roman fountain. The jet ascends and falling fills the marble basin circling round. This, veiling itself over, spills into a second basin's ground. The second in such plenty lives, its bubbling flood a third invests. And each at once receives and gives, and streams and rests. Here we can put a picture of a Roman fountain for us. I don't know what is this, what this kind of thing is describing? Maybe. I'm not sure what we have in mind here, actually, by this poem. Well, let's just put this. Okay. This is neither a poetic painting or a fountain actually present, nor a reproduction of the general essence of a Roman fountain. So it's not about a specific fountain, so it's not a poetic painting, and it's not a reproduction of the general essence of a Roman fountain. I don't know why that is. Yet truth is set into the work. What truth is happening in the work? Can truth happen at all and thus be historical? Yet truth, people say, is something timeless and supertemporal. Well, we'll find out if we keep reading, probably. I'm not sure quite what this means here to say this is not a... I thought it would be a reproduction of the general essence of a Roman fountain. Yet truth is set into the work. We know, so he's saying, obviously, right, that truth happens. So when it's an event, which is, like I've said, I mean, it was when I first read this essay, it was like a life-changingly important idea, although now it feels old hat a little bit to me. But if it's new to you, it can be a really, really life-changing idea that truth is an event. And then also, if it's an event that happens, it's historical, right? Truth is not something timeless and trans-temporal and ahistorical. It is an event in history. But what does it mean to say that this poem sets truth to work, that it happens in history? Let's keep reading and see if we get an answer. We seek the actuality of the artwork in order actually to find there the art prevailing within it. Right, so this is back to that kind of way we began the essay. We're going to look at the specific artwork, the particular artwork, to find the art that prevails within it, the general art. And I forgot exactly. I think prevail etymologically has to do with power. Is that right? Yeah. So it has power in the artwork, right? We seek the actuality of the artwork in order actually to find there the art prevailing within it, right? To find the art remember, art's the bigger category that takes place or prevails within the particular. The thingly substructure is what proved to be the most immediate actuality in the work. But to comprehend this thingly feature, the traditional thing concepts are not adequate, for they themselves fail to grasp the essence of the thing. The most immediate actuality. So we've got that Aristotelian word there, actuality, right? The most immediate which can also be a potentiality. So it's like the first actuality and also potentiality, I guess, but is the thingly substructure. So now we're going to maybe finally find out what the thing is, because now we found out what both equipment and work is, still without finding out what thing is. But to comprehend this thingly feature, the traditional thing concepts are not adequate, for they themselves fail to grasp the essence of the thing. The currently predominant thing concept, thing as formed matter, is not even derived from the essence of the thing, but from the essence of the equipment. It also turned out that equipmental being generally has long since occupied a peculiar preeminence in the interpretation of beings. Right, this is a summary of what we've already talked about. This preeminence of equipmentality, which, however, has never been expressly thought, suggested that we pose the question of equipment anew while avoiding the current interpretations. We allowed a work to tell us what equipment is. By this means, almost clandestinely, let's quickly Google if there's any interesting etymology in clandestine. It just means secretly. So the etymology is the same as the definition. By this means almost clandestinely, right? So in some kind of secret way, it came to light. I guess, in learning what equipment is through the work, we also learned that the work is what helps us to learn what things like equipment are, or what particular beings are. I shouldn't use the word things. By this means, almost clandestinely, it came to light what is at work in the work. The disclosure of the particular being in its being, the happening of truth, right? So the disclosure of equipment in reliability, maybe, or the disclosure of the shoes in its reliability in the world, something like that, I think is what it would say in this particular case, the particular being in its being. The happening of truth. And I guess you could think about those, if we're thinking of being as the unity of analogy, there's an analogy between Van Gogh's painting in its setting to work the truth and the shoes in their reliability. There's an analogy between what they're doing, which is that's what each being rests on or something, maybe. But that's getting a little off track. If, however, the actuality of the work can be defined solely by means of what is at work in the work, then what about our intention to seek out the actual artwork in its actuality? As long as we suppose that the actuality of the work lay primarily in its thingly substructure, we were going astray. We are now confronted by a remarkable result of our considerations, if it still deserves to be called a result at all. So we've really had the rug pulled out from all of us, because we've gone on from under us, because we've literally been trying to figure out this whole time what a thing is, and it turns out an artwork's not a thing at all, and it's an irrelevant question, it seems. 2 points become clear. First, the dominant thing concepts are inadequate as a means of grasping the thingly aspect of the work. Second, what we tried to treat as the most immediate actuality of the work, its thingly substructure, does not belong to the work in that way at all. Or so maybe it's just things don't have a thingly substructure. As soon as we look for such a thingly substructure in the work, we have unwittingly taken the work as equipment, to which we then also ascribe a superstructure supposed to contain its artistic equality. I guess because the thingly substructure would be the matter, which is then formed toward the superstructure of how it's supposed to be presented, which is the way to think about equipment, to the use to which it will be put, and not the way to think about art. But the work is not a piece of equipment that is fitted out in addition with an aesthetic value that adheres to it. The work is no more anything of the kind than the bare thing is a piece of equipment that merely lacks the specific equipmental characteristics of usefulness and being made. Our formulation of the question of the work has been shaken because we asked not about the work, but half about a thing and half about equipment. Still, this formulation of the question was not first developed by us. It is the formulation native to aesthetics, right? Form and matter is the most common way to talk in aesthetics. The way in which aesthetics views the artwork from the outset is dominated by the traditional interpretation of all beings as things. Yet the shaking of this accustomed formulation is not the essential point. What matters is a first opening of our vision to the fact that what is workly in the work, equipmental in equipment, and thingly in the thing comes closer to us only when we think the being of beings. Right, in other words, we have to think being, right, to answer any of these questions, right, to see how beings, to let beings be and to rest in themselves. To this end, it is necessary beforehand that the barriers of our preconceptions fall away and that the current pseudo-concepts be set aside. That is why we had to take this detour. But it brings us directly to a road that may lead to a determination of the thingly feature in the work. The thingly feature in the work should not be denied. Okay, so it is thingly, but it doesn't have a thingly substructure. But if it belongs admittedly to the work being of the work, it must be conceived by way of the work's workly nature. This is where you get that Heideggerese, where you're like repeating, you sound like Gertrude Stein, just repeating the same words over and over. But if it belongs admittedly to the work being of the work, it must be conceived by way of the work's workly nature. In other words, it must be thought in terms of the work and not in terms of things. So I guess this is ultimately the rejection of Aristotle, that you can't build things up in that way, that the work is in its workly nature and not in something else. If this is so, then the road toward the determination of the thingly reality of the work leads not from thing to work, but from work to thing. So actually what he's saying is we should have started with work to figure out what things are, rather than with thing to figure out what works are. I guess. That is what he's saying, but why he's saying that, I'm not 100% sure right now. But let's just read the last paragraph. The artwork opens up in its own way the being of beings. This opening up, i.e., this revealing, i.e., the truth of beings, happens in the work. In the artwork, the truth of beings has set itself to work. Art is truth setting itself to work. What is truth itself, that it sometimes appropriates as art? What is this setting itself to work? So truth. So in turn, we're actually turning to ask what is truth, since the artwork is the is what sets to work the truth of beings. We're actually going to turn and ask what is truth, and it sometimes appropriates to itself as art. So what is this setting itself to work? So that's the end of the first section, the thing section, actually with no answer to what the thing is, but an answer to what equipment is, and sort of an answer to what art or the work is, but not sufficiently clarified, because we're going to have another section to explain what it means for something to be truth setting itself to work. So we're going to stop there because I just wanted to get to the end of this section. But so there's two more sections. So we finally made it through the first section. So it leaves the work and truth. What is the third section? Truth and art. So we move from work to art in the second and third sections. And I'm antsy to know what the thing is. I feel like I got art. I've got that. I want to know what the thing is. And I don't actually remember what he says. I don't know if I even paid that enough attention to that the first time I read this. And then we have the epilogue, which I think he wrote later, and an addendum. Okay. But so that's where we're going to stop. I was trying to decide if I want to just stop now or like play some games.